they knew for certain that the flying object was keeping an eye on them. It was following them and them alone because they were the only ones on the road. Hi everyone and welcome back to a new video, and I also think it's gonna be the last video of this year. So before I start, I want to wish you all a happy new year. Hopefully I can make more videos next year. I've been a little bit busy because I started a new study and I have to find time to make these videos because, of course, as I already mentioned 100 times before, I don't earn money with this, so I can only film when I have time, when I'm in the mood. And I also had a throat infection, which was very, very painful. I think you can still hear it a little bit, but I'm good enough to make a video. So without further ado, let's start with a new video. And this time we are going back to one of my favorite subjects, a subject I haven't discussed in a long time, but I want to discuss it once again, which is of course aliens. And I've already mentioned this before, but I do believe in aliens. I think the universe is so big, I can't really believe that we are the only living things in the universe. I don't know if I believe if they are green with big eyes. And if I haven't seen it, I don't believe it. So I really hope one day we will find out, one day when I'm alive. But until then, I still believe in them, and yes, I love talking about them, so that's what we are gonna do today as well. And when I think about the universe, it always scares me a little bit. I get a little funny feeling in the bottom of my stomach. It doesn't really scare me, but it always interests me, and it's like the unknown, which is giving you weird vibes. I think you might know what I mean. And I always want to know everything. That's also the reason why I started this channel. And I think you do too, because you are watching these videos. And more alien and space videos are coming up the next year. But for now we are gonna talk about the most famous alien abduction. I'm not certain if it did happen, but let's find out. I made a video about aliens once where I gave my opinion about specific subjects, and one of the subjects was about this specific alien abduction. And to be honest, I was very skeptical about this abduction and also all the other subjects about aliens. But it's a very interesting story, so I really want to share it with you. It's the story of Barney and Betty Hill. And it's one of the most famous alien abduction stories. And it was the first widely reported alien abduction in the world. So let's dive into it. Barney and Betty Hill were an American couple who lived in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Barney was employed by the United States Postal Office and Betty was a social worker. They were a very unique couple back then because Barney was black and Betty was white, which wasn't very common in the 1960s. Interracial couples were very rare and not really accepted in the United States of America. But this didn't stop them because their love was real and they wanted to celebrate that. So they went on a holiday to the Niagara Falls in Canada and they had a wonderful time there. They also went to visit Montreal and they spent the afternoon there. They wanted to find a place to sleep there, but they heard that a hurricane was whirling up the coast there. So they decided, for their safety, to drive back home during the night. Little did they know that this would be a night that would change their lives forever. They drove down an empty, winding country road in New Hampshire's White Mountains. The date was September 19th, 1961. They were all alone on the road. They hadn't seen any cars for miles. It was dark, but a strange light in the sky caught their attention. It seemed like the object was following them, and Betty had been watching it with her binoculars. She was not sure what it was. It could be a star or maybe an object. As she was watching the star, it seemed to be getting brighter and larger each time she looked at it. And eventually it even started to move. She told Barney about it and they decided to stop the car and take a look. They went out of the car and observed the mysterious light. Barney thought it was probably a satellite and told Betty not to worry about it. But Betty felt like it was not behaving like a satellite, but she had never seen one before so she decided to just agree with Barney. She gave the binoculars to Barney because she wasn't sure if she really believed him. Barney took a closer look at the object and was also doubting what he saw. He mentioned several logical things like, of course, the satellite, maybe an airplane or a military helicopter, and also a passenger jet. This is what happens most of the time when people don't know what they're seeing. They try to find logical evidence or logical things to say because they can't really wrap their mind around it. And then the object came towards Barney and Betty in a very rapid rate of speed. Barney began to feel uncomfortable and uneased. He returned to the car followed by Betty, and they drove down the highway. He reassured Betty that it was nothing, but deep down he knew it was something he could not explain. But he really wanted Betty to feel safe, and he decided to let it go. He wanted to return home as fast as he could. They were driving further south, and Betty was still looking out of the window. Suddenly, out of the blue, she sees the flying object once again, and it seems like it's following them. She becomes terrified and tells Barney that the object is following them. It seems to fly zigzag and move like a ping pong ball. Barney was getting quite frightened as well. He thought it was a military pilot who was playing a game with them. Now they knew for certain that the flying object was keeping an eye on them. It was following them and them alone because they were the only ones on the road. It was following them for approximately 30 miles, and eventually they reached an area called Indian Heat. There the object was coming even closer to them. It left the top of the mountain, came out over the highway and stopped midair on the highway right in front of their car. And this is where the story stops for now. Betty and Barney Hill returned home in their car. They arrived during dawn, but they felt very uneased. They felt dirty, and their watches stopped working and they would never work again. And they also had some odd sensations and impulses that they could not explain. Betty wanted their luggage to be kept near the back door instead of in the living room. Barney noticed that the leather strap for the binoculars was torn, but he was sure that he wasn't the one who did it. And also the toes of his shoes were scraped. Barney wanted to examine his private parts in the bathroom because he felt something wasn't right. But he found nothing alarming or unusual. And since they both felt dirty, Barney and Betty took long showers to remove the contamination. They had memories up until they witnessed the UFO and drove home. They heard a buzzing sound, and after that, their memories became incomplete. They tried to remember what happened, but they were both unable to do so. They were very tired and decided to go to sleep. They slept for a few hours, but then Betty awoke. She suddenly wanted to observe the clothes that she wore during the drive. She went inside the closet and noticed that her dress was torn at the hem, zipper and lining. She also noticed a weird pinkish powder on the dress. She hung her dress back on the clothesline and the pinkish powder blew away and disappeared. The dress was so badly damaged that she wanted to throw it away, but eventually she changed her mind because she thought it might be something of importance. And when Barney also woke up, they decided to check on their car. They found shiny concentric circles on the trunk of their car, and they hadn't been there before. They experimented with a compass, moving it close to the spot. The needle would whirl rapidly when they placed it above the spot, and when they moved it away from the spot, it would stop immediately. On September the 21st, Betty decided to call Pease Air Force Base to report their UFO encounter. A man named Major Paul W. Henderson called the Hills the next day for a detailed interview. After talking to the couple, he made a report and determined that the Hills probably misidentified the planet Jupiter. But Betty didn't want to give up. A few days later, she went to the local library and borrowed a UFO book. It was a book written by a retired Marine Corps major called Donald E. Kehoe. He was also the head of the NYCAP, a civilian UFO research group. Betty wrote to him, telling him the whole story as far as she could remember it. She also told him that she and Barney were considering to go into hypnosis to see if they could recall what happened. Her letter was passed on to Walter N. Webb. He was an astronomer and an NYCAP member. He met with the couple on October the 21st, 1961. They talked with him for 6 hours and tried to tell him every single detail that they could remember. They told them that they might have developed a mental block, because maybe some portions of the event were traumatic for them. Webb was convinced that they were telling the truth, although he thought that there were probably some minor uncertainties. Betty also told him about her dreams. 10 days after the UFO encounter, Betty began having a series of vivid dreams. For 5 nights, she would have very intense and detailed dreams. She had never experienced something like that before. But after those 5 nights, it stopped and never returned. Of course, she mentioned it to Barney, but he wasn't concerned about it at all. She dropped the matter, but she could not forget about her dreams. In November of 1961, she decided to write down every single detail of her dreams. Barney was also still affected by this experience. He developed an ulcer and anxiety. And in February of the next year, Barney and Betty made frequent weekend drives to the White Mountains, hoping it would trigger their mind to remember what had happened. But this did not happen. Barney and Betty were still uneasy and decided to seek mental help. They met with Benjamin Simon, a psychiatrist and neurologist who specialized in hypnosis. They met with him on December 14th, 1963. Simon did not really believe their story about the UFO and aliens, but he really wanted to help them and hoped to uncover more of their experience through hypnosis. Their sessions started on January the 4th of 1964. Simon hypnotized Betty and Barney several times each, and the sessions lasted until June the 6th, 1964. And he wanted to hypnotize them separately so that they could not overhear one another's recollections. Simon helped the couple to piece together what they both thought that had happened. During their sessions, both Barney and Betty were distressed and very emotional. And Betty and Barney's story were very consistent with one another. Betty's account under hypnosis was also very similar to the dreams she had, with some differences. They also both told some different accounts. But this story that I'm gonna tell you is what they could make of both of their stories bind together. So both of their experiences and also the similarities. So as you know, their memory stopped when the UFO landed in front of their car. And while they were under hypnosis, they remembered that it landed on their car instead of in front of their car. They were put to sleep and short grey beings walked them up a long ramp into the spacecraft, which was disc-shaped. Barney described them as somehow not human, and they were dressed in shiny black uniforms. Approximated 6 to 11 of them in total. And when Betty and Barney went inside, they were separated. They took turns in an examination room. The room had curved walls and there was a large light hanging from the ceiling. They were both asked to climb on a metal table. The table was short, and because of that, Barney's legs hung over the side. During the examinations, the aliens or beings removed Barney and Betty's clothes, plucked strands of their hair, took clippings of their nails and scraped their skin. They placed the samples on a clear material that looked like glass. Then the beings took needles that were connected to long wires and propped their heads, arms, legs and spines. And one large needle was inserted into Betty's belly. She believed it was a pregnancy test and it left her twisting in pain. A cup-like device was placed on Barney's private parts. And they also did some other examinations, but I can't go into detail here on YouTube. But I think you can guess what they did. And the leader of the beings was watching from the side while they were examined. After Betty's examination ended, the beings rushed back into a room and they were very excited. They discovered that Barney's teeth could be removed. However, they did not remove them. Betty also reported that she had a conversation with the leader in English. Barney saw it and heard the being speak in a mumbling language that he could not understand. And Betty also mentioned this detail. They both hadn't observed the being's mouth move while they were speaking English with them. They think that the beings used telepathy to communicate with them. Betty asked the leader where the craft had flown and he showed her a star map. Betty sketched a copy of the star map that she described as a three-dimensional projection similar to a hologram. And after that they were escorted from the ship and taken back to their car. In a daze, they watched the ship leave. Barney saw another light appear on the road and he was afraid that it would happen all over again. Betty claimed it was the moon, but the moon had already set a few hours before. The whole experience would have taken 2 to 3 hours. After that, they waited for a little while and continued their journey back home. After the hypnosis sessions were completed, Simon was not very convinced that this had truly happened. He thought that the recollection of Barney's UFO encounter was inspired by the dreams of Betty. But of course, Barney and Betty did not agree with him. Betty was very convinced and passionate about that they were abducted by aliens. Barney agreed with Betty but wasn't as convinced as Betty was. And even though the Hills and Simon were not seeing eye to eye, the hypnosis sessions worked. Betty and Barney would not be tortured anymore by their abduction anxiety. After the hypnosis sessions were over, Barney and Betty were going back to their normal lives again. They did not shy away from discussing their abduction with their friends, family, UFO researchers and other people who were interested, but they never longed for publicity. Publicity would come anyway, and it would become big news when the Boston Traveler placed their story on their front page. This happened on October the 25th in 1965. The reporter of the Boston Traveler, John H. Luttrell, had allegedly been giving an audio tape recording of the lecture Barney and Betty Hill made in Quincy Center in late 1963. He also learned that they had undergone hypnosis and he had obtained notes from confidential interviews that the Hills had had with UFO researchers. The United Press International picked up the story and the abduction of Barney and Betty Hill became known international. Many books, interviews and documentaries followed. Sadly, just 3 years later, Barney Hill died of a cerebral hemorrhage on February the 25th, 1969. He was only 46 years old. After that, Betty became a celebrity in the UFO community. She died of cancer on October the 17th, 2004 at the age of 85. After Barney's death, she never remarried, and she even claimed that the aliens had visited her several times in the decades that followed. The story of Barney and Betty Hill wasn't the only story about an alien abduction, but it was one of the most publicized stories in the world. Their story was one of the first scary stories about aliens. Before their story, alien encounter stories were always very friendly. Their story became a big inspiration for alien movies and stories. Grey aliens with big eyes and big heads. UFO circles and abduction, that is probably what you think when you think about aliens, because that is what you see on TV. And that is probably because of Betty and Barney Hill and their description of aliens. The star map was also analyzed. They first thought it could be the Zeta Reticuli system, but eventually they found out there was little similarity. Either way, the story of Barney and Betty Hill's alien abduction remains one of the most famous alien abduction stories, and only they know if it truly happened. So this time there's not really a too concluded sentence. I can only tell you what I think and what I believe. I really want to believe that this truly happened because it's very interesting, but I highly doubt it. And it's very strange because the first time I heard about this story, I also heard that they talked about an Irishman that was also on a ship, and this really made me dispute the story right away. And there was also a story about the pink substance on Betty's dress, and that they couldn't identify what it was, and that it was not from this earth.
The garment is Betty's last remaining piece of evidence, and the pink substance from the abduction is still there.
And you can see here the blue, and this is where it became stained by the pink powdery substance. This is a place I cut out and sent it to a lab they were unable to analyze it.
But when I was researching this story for this video, I couldn't really find anything about it, so I didn't want to include it in the video because it's like this, you know. If they really couldn't identify the pink substance, it could be something from another world or maybe something from outer space, and it would make the story more believable. And also, I don't know why Barney and Betty Hill would make up this story. They were already a very strange couple for that time because they were both from another race. But some people really want attention and create false stories to gain attention because they are stressed or they want some distraction. And this is proven scientifically, so I'm not making this up. Barney and Betty were, of course, an interracial couple, so you could say, like, why would they want attention? Because they already get a lot of negative attention. But on the other side, maybe they wanted distraction and they wanted to focus on something else. Of course, this is just speculating, so I don't have the answer for that. But that are things you can consider. But I do think it's remarkable that Betty always stayed true to her story and she really believed that it happened. Even when she died, she still believed it happened. So I do really think that she believes it is true. I do really hope it's a true story, but I'm not convinced. It's really I have to see it to believe it. I need some evidence to believe it type of situation, and in this case there isn't enough evidence to convince me personally. But I really want to know what you guys think. Do you believe the story? Do you believe in aliens? Do you think there is more in the universe? Let me know in the comments. And if you like alien videos, I also made a video about the Roswell incident, which is also a very famous alien story. And of course the video I mentioned before where I discussed my opinion about alien stories and UFO sightings. And I still agree with what I said back then. I'll put a link to the videos underneath this video. And I hope you comment something about your opinion. Anyway, once again, Happy New Year. I hope to see you in the next year. I'm gonna make more cool videos. If you have any suggestions, you can also put them underneath this video. And I hope to see you in the next year. Bye!